Now you're welcome back. So we are going to turn our attention to Athens, Greece against the Republic of Ireland on Friday night in Group B of the Euro 2024 qualifiers here at last. A defining game in many ways for Stephen Kenny, but then again, aren't they all? It's been that kind of a tenure. Greece 3-0 winners against Gibraltar thus far. Ireland, of course, beaten 1-0 by France in Dublin. Ireland will play Gibraltar on Monday night then in Dublin. And if your sense of this is that these are two sides very much jostling for third and hoping to have a chance of pulling off a bit of a shock in this group with France and the Netherlands, then Greece feel exactly the same way about us as we feel about them. Greek manager Gus Poyet these days, he said we must win against Ireland if we're to stand a chance of qualification in this group. So it is all set up. Let's get over to Athens. Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent is patiently waiting. Hello, Dan.
Hi, Joe. How are you?
Very well. So for a lot of the players, preparation for this game has dragged on. The championship in particular, those players finished up a long time ago. They've had a camp in Bristol. They've had a camp in Turkey. They are now in Athens. They must be sick of the sight of each other.
Well, I mean, you would hope that they're not. I mean, that's obviously you would hope that they're sort of, I don't know, savouring the fact that they never get to spend this much quality time together. You know, they generally come together when there's get together on a Monday and there's a game on a Thursday and it's all a bit sort of, manic and pressurised and you head back to your club and I mean,
it's exciting, it's romantic, it's, God, I haven't seen you in so long. Imagine me and you stuck together for weeks on end.
I mean, it would be hell. It would be hell. But we would obviously outwardly portray the image that it's been very good. And
very fruitful, yeah.
It could be both of those things. It could both be hell and also productive. You could learn more about the knowledge of an individual. Like everyone's on about Evan Ferguson, right? Like you're not an Irish footballer now if you don't get asked about Evan Ferguson within 2 minutes. Like every interview, because I was in Turkey for a couple of days and now in Athens, and it feels like every player interview now goes down the line of how are you getting on, general discussion and what do you make of this Evan Ferguson kid, But I suppose they're all spending time away with Evan Ferguson and newer players in the group, and you would hope that the preparation time is used beneficially, but also with younger players. I mean, maybe is it different that it's a younger core of players, that it's not like, they're happy-go-lucky in a nice hotel, but tennis, golf, pool, I think, stuff like that. If you had an older core of the squad who had families at home and stuff, yes. Is your attitude a little bit different? I don't know. I mean, I think it's quite a young group, so maybe it's not as draining as it might be for a team of old pros. You could maybe draw that point. And I presume none of the players said Ferguson, he's not all that. You'd be surprised to hear that no, they haven't. They haven't gone down that road. I mean, look, paper talk is paper talk. Sort of players who are media trained will always say the right things. But I think what is probably striking is that you can always sense if there's an undertone in what people say about someone. It's like, oh, he's a confident lad, can be portrayed as something else. You've heard that about certain young players who've come in the past. But I think what people genuinely are saying about Evan Ferguson, and that's why people probably feel optimistic about his prospects, is that he does slot into the group fairly easily. He is sort of quite a likeable, grounded fella. We were talking to Nathan Collins the other day about him, and just the discussion naturally went along the lines of they're actually both Collins and Ferguson had dads who were footballers, and does that in some way influence their mentality? They've been around the game from a certain age, or they know the game, and I don't know, Evan Ferguson seems to be a really good character and sort of easygoing, not high maintenance, and that probably helps everyone warm to his story. Like, even if they are rivals, you do sense that people are quite happy for him, as opposed to, as sort of thinking, this lad's he's a bit cocky. There's no sense of that at all. So primarily the point of this camp has been to maintain fitness for players who have such a long wait from the end of their club season to these two games. Obviously, I suspect the time has been used to further dig down into
tactics and style of play and all of those things that international managers are so desperate to do and don't get the time to do all that often. So in so much as you can deduce from what players have said here or there, or what agents have said, or what Kenny has said, how have they used the time? Because I'm sure there has been that or and or aspect as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is a long time away together. I mean, they did have that initial training camp in Bristol the week before last, which was for the Championship players, the EFL players, a couple of League of Ireland players in that squad. And that was like a 4-day. That was just like sort of topping up, I suppose, for players who've been out of time. But yeah, I mean, they spent 10 days in Turkey. And that's a long time. I mean, I definitely think, there's two ways of looking at it. It definitely reduces your scope for excuses, around preparation. I think at times in the Kenny era, I mean, I talked about it earlier, you come in on a Monday, you have a game on a Thursday, you have like 2 training sessions, bang, bang, here you go. I mean, this game has been circling the diary for some period of time. That there's very little forgiveness if you suddenly look like a team that doesn't have a game plan. So I think the first week in Turkey, they weren't doing specific work on Greece per se, in the sense that they weren't doing like video work on Greece and specific Greece orientated stuff. It was more in-house stuff building towards that. And they had 3 11v11 games, short and sharp ones, I think on the Wednesday of last week. And then it was all building up to Saturday. But they were meant to play a training match in Turkey, couldn't find a suitable opponent, so played an in-house 70-minute game. That was 11v11, quite intense. I think players have reported saying it was very hard going. Part of the reason for Turkey was to acclimatise for Greece and actually to go for tougher conditions as it happens. So that, in a weird way, while it is quite warm here in Athens, for players it might be a shock to the system. If they came from Dublin training to suddenly intense stuff in Greece, it would be like, wow, what's this? I think the 11v11 in Greece was about... Sorry, in Turkey, apologies, was about that. So they had 2 days off then, Sunday, Monday. Players were able to sort of unwind. And then from Tuesday onwards, it's been intense into Greece stuff and very targeted game plan specific work. So I think, Troy Parrott made a point that while they didn't maybe realise they were doing Greece preparation last week, they were, in terms of certain things they were doing. But now it's very much defined in the sense of they've done the proper Greece homework. I mean, to be fair, in that 11v11 game, the second team as such were set up in the Greece formation in the 4-3-3 that Greece play, to give them the sort of proper preparation for the first team. Although I think they swapped. I don't think it was quite the first team, but the bones of it, just to get an idea. So again, in fairness, I don't think you can say they've left things to chance in terms of preparation, which is great. But obviously, there's a no excuses element then that comes with that if you look like a rabble on the day. I
think Stephen Kenny was openly not loving the idea of Athens in the middle of June. So is it as stifling and hot and sticky as we might fear?
I don't think it is what it was imagined to be when the draw was made last October. There was 2 aspects to the draw. Getting France and Holland was obviously a nightmare, but getting Greece in June wasn't far down the list in terms of bad news. Just because the Greece games are clearly so important to establish a foothold in the group, to have a chance of the upset. You need to take care of Greece as much as you possibly can. You occasionally have 40-degree days here, and it's cooling down at night. But from talking to people here, the classic great chat with the local taxi driver coming in last night, a football fan, basically doing my research for me in certain ways. But basically he was saying, listen, it feels more like we haven't hit the peak of summer here at all yet. You can feel that yourself. It is warm today. It's 28 degrees. It's hard enough going. There's 2,500 Irish fans travelling. Anyone who was doing that, who was on the way out or whatever, prepare for warm weather. But the fact is that the kickoff is 9:45 p.m. local time, just with time difference. The feeling is it's going to be 21, 22 degrees. Yeah, it's difficult, but it's not something that's career-defining memories of this heat in Greece. The forecast doesn't appear to be along those lines. The reference point for preparations, is Ireland flagging badly in Yerevan last year in Armenia. Even that game was 5 o'clock local time. A different animal compared to this. So the hope is that the heat, when it's relevant, and you have to have a degree of conditioning to still be able to manage that. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it's not the monster we possibly feared it might have been at the time.
Well, that's very encouraging. So 2,500 fans travelling over. It is the AEK Athens Stadium, 32,000 capacity. It looks very nice and compact and atmospheric. As for Athens generally, I've never had the pleasure. I guess it's one of those places you should really get to. Even a cursory glance here at Google Images, Dan, and it's a pretty stunning place. I don't suppose you've been up the Acropolis just yet, but what's your sense of Athens?
Well, actually, I did, because I travelled overnight from Turkey. I just decided to travel overnight just to be here first thing this morning. So I actually did. The first thing I did was to try and wander up that direction.
Well, now, let's turn you into a travel journalist. Give it to us.
Well, this is where my failing as a travel journalist come in. I went up the Acropolis, went up there because it's a 15-minute sort of walk, sort of uphill from the city centre to get to where the Acropolis is. So you sort of pass the thing, there's a sort of a flea market. You go through that. It's very sort of old school. Hadrian's Library. There's like another ruins there of an old ancient building. But the Acropolis, I got there and the queues are very long, and I just decided I'm not taking the queue. I'm not going to standing in that queue. I've got work to do. I sort of hoped it might be a little bit quiet. It wasn't. But I had a look from a distance, and there's these rock foundations just across me. You could climb up to get a good view of the Acropolis itself. I mean, it's stunning. You have this view of the whole city, which is incredible. I've never been here before. And you probably have an image of Athens in your head of this sort of ancient, rustic sort of quality. You have this view, and it is that. It very much is that. So, I mean, there's a lengthy queue to get in. I don't know. I'm not always great on this sort of I just like the Colosseum in Rome. I've been there. I sort of feel like I don't know, do I appreciate it fully? I like the museums and going in and learning about the history, but just going for a walk around it and stuff. I don't know, am I going to brave the queue for an hour and a half to do it? I might not. But I mean, it is location wise and where it's positioned over Athens, it's stunning. And you will see loads of pictures of Ireland fans there on Friday without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah. But, I
think it turns out you weren't showing false humility. Your instincts about your pedigree as a travel journalist, spot on. That was abysmal. Good man.
That was, do you know what? I mean, halfway through, I was like, it was a travel review delivered as though you were talking about I don't know, a League One match.
Oh my God. I felt like Father Stone went to Athens and came back and talked to me about it.
Well, I can tell you, I mean, I've travelled a lot of places around the world, and I just realised that the archaeological, that type of stuff for me wouldn't be my thing. I'd like an old history museum, all Eastern Europe, a lot of those places. But Athens, the beauty of the buildings is just lost in me, Joe.
Okay,
you can't get those minutes back. I would recommend
the upkeep of the Acropolis doesn't quite do it for you. It's just a bit faded. Not what it was.
I feel like you need an eye for it, don't you?
I don't know. How big was the queue, by the way, if anyone's ever thinking of heading over and doing it?
What was that, sorry?
How big is the queue for anyone who's actually thinking?
Oh, no, it is. That's the thing. There was just only one entrance, and it was going around the corner, and it was moving pretty slowly. And I did that thing where you stand at the back of the queue, see how quickly it's moving, and the people around me were sort of grumbling about it. So I don't know. It's possible there probably is some way where you can pay premium over the odds to skip the queue. Yeah. I might look at that on match day. I mean, it is a 9:45 p.m. kickoff. Oh, yeah. But it's to be honest though, to me, I mean, all joking aside, I just love walking around the city. Sometimes you can all move towards the main site where everyone wants to go. This is the spot to go. And I think sometimes you lose the essence of the city, by spending all your time there. There's people there trying to sell you this and that or whatever. Whereas actually just the city itself, the walk up to it is as good as anything, because there's a real sort of buzz and a hum to it, and like, you know, sort of an edginess in some ways as well, in the sense that like it's not like it's not a pristine city or anything like that. There's a real sense of like you know, it's, I suppose maybe you know that in a weird way from football and what the atmosphere in the stadiums can be like. Like, I've never been to Athens, but been to Thessaloniki where PAOK play, and it's obviously a real intense, like, hell of an environment, and sort of rough and ready in parts, but like real.
Yeah.
You know, it's not something that's everything is like perfectly clean pavements and all of that. There's a little bit more, something a little bit more earthy to it, and that's actually what I liked about it. I just liked about walking around the place.
Yes, as opposed to something quasi Disneyland. No, I take the point. Listen, pay for that premium skip the queue job, stick it on the independent accounts tab. I know how you operate down the years. You've done worse.
Well, I mean, thank you, Joe. That is possibly true, but I mean, I'm just going to redact any comments at this point onward. That's all good.
So let's talk football then. I saw you were writing about Troy Parrott, who was speaking to the media. So Troy Parrott, I think, and he has been for some time, but is now approaching a very interesting juncture in his career, I suppose, as the years begin to tick by, and he is still so young. But 4 goals in 31 appearances for Preston as part of his latest loan move. He managed to injure himself in the celebration after his first championship goal in October, which didn't help things. And for Ireland, he's played 18 times at this stage, has 4 goals, the highlights being that last minute winner against Lithuania, which really was an amazing moment, and the link up with Obafemi against Scotland. These were big moments for Troy Parrott in an Irish jersey. It's kind of interesting how we view him, because I must say my first thought when Ange Postecoglou was appointed was not, oh, Troy Parrott, Ange, how will that work? I probably, like many people, don't see him really as likely to make it at Spurs. It's such a big club, and the loan move at Preston, you couldn't say he lit it up in the way that Tom Cannon did, and we'll come to Cannon in a moment. So what Parrott said about the situation was, I'll go back to Spurs in pre-season and I'll try and show Postecoglou what I can do, and then I go from there. And he seemed to be none the wiser really about his future. That's a fair sense of where Parrott is. What was the tone behind his chat with the media? Is he worried? Is he feeling pretty good about things? What was your sense?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of felt a little bit sorry for Parrott, right? Because he only ended up doing media at the last minute because Michael Obafemi was meant to do it and then just decided he wasn't going to do it or whatever reason. At the end, and Parrott, who was just sort of like training away diligently, I think was, and seems to be quite obliging with this stuff, was like at the last minute he was told, "You're doing it, Troy." And like, no one is necessarily expecting Parrott to be involved in this game. I don't think so anyway, maybe off the bench. So it's a harsh one really, because like, he hasn't exactly had the best of years, and you're sort of thrust in there to suddenly talk about it. Now maybe that like speaks to his character in some way, that like he's willing to do it, and like he seems to be a very established member of the squad. Like even in the context of the Tom Cannon stuff, you know, people, and maybe it's just like the online world, and it's very fickle. Everyone's like, oh, why is Parrott even in the squad? And it's like, well, hang on a little bit. Like, I mean, this time 12 months ago, like he did goal and assist against Scotland in a big game. You know, he was first choice. He missed a big chance in Scotland in September. Okay, fair enough. But he summered, well, even 2 summers ago, he scored those goals in Andorra that really helped Stephen Kenny at that time. So he's got 18 caps. Like, he's a popular enough member of the group, or he's an established member of the group, and people just want to bin these lads out sometimes very quickly, you know, because they've had a bit of a shaky run. Whereas clearly, like, you know, Stephen Kenny is a believer, the staff are a believer. And I think, like, Parrott's a funny one, because I think you certainly have a perception of him, and even with, like, the bleach blonde hair now and the sort of the look, he has the look of the footballer. He's always had that little bit of the swagger. But, like, Stephen Kenny goes out of his way to talk about his dedication, like, what a hard worker he actually is. You know, the sort of, even getting back from that injury, Kenny was making the point, not many others would have, that actually, for all the maybe the appearances and stuff you might look at, he's actually really, really working to try and make the best of his career, when unfortunately, like, the story that we're probably seeing is that he just hasn't met the expectations here, you know. And it's tough, but he's only 21, and like, he was almost making that point himself, Parrott's like, well, I am only 21.
Yeah.
When he gets to the Evan Ferguson question, you know, can you give him any advice about the spotlight? And it's almost like you're expecting Parrott to take on that, well, yeah, when I was a lad, like, it's 3 years ago, and he's still only a lad, like, you know. And the guy was making the point that I was looking at, and it's funny, you look at the profile of the 4 Irish strikers in the squad here. You've got Adamida, who's 22, Obafemi is 22, Parrott is 21, Evan Ferguson is 18. I was looking back at the Euro 2016 squad. Robbie Keane was 35, Darryl Murphy 33, Walters 32, Shane Long 29. Like it's a complete change. But I think then what you have is that when you have 4 really young strikers, you're competitively like pitting them all against each other. And it feels like Parrott is forwards right now. Yes, if he was on his own and there was no other young strikers in his age group, you'd be thinking, okay, he's 21, he's made mistakes, he's highs and lows, but, we'll be fine. Where it feels like he's under a little bit more pressure now because of the Ferguson factor and the profile of some of the others. And I mean, I remember going over to cover his first game for Spurs at 17 against Colchester, and there was a massive buzz, and maybe just everything seemed like an anticlimax compared to our expectations of. And you're right, like I feel like a lot of people in their head wouldn't be thinking about Spurs and Troy Parrott. They almost forget, but he has spent the last 3 years on loan. So, and even Stephen Kenny has started talking about, well, he needs to have a good loan this year. So, there's no one really thinking that it's going to happen from there at the moment, unfortunately. But like that's supposed to be his motivation to go and try and improve. And if he is a good trainer, which he seems to be, then maybe pre-season wise he can in some ways try and at least plant the seed.
I like to think of Obafemi on a sun lounger with a cocktail, looking over at Parrott, speaking to the media as this is happening. Sucker. Tom Cannon, 20 years of age. So he pitched up at Preston, same club as Troy Parrott from Everton. He pitched up in January and managed to score 8 times. Parrott had been there all year, scored 4. Lee Carsley had a look, said, we like the cut of your jib, how'd you fancy the English under-21s? And Tom Cannon, his agent, I think, informed FAI, Stephen Kenny, he's considering the situation. That generally means the direction of travel is going in a pretty obvious way. So that, I would think, is the general feeling.
Well, it doesn't look particularly great. I mean, you're always waiting to be proved wrong. I mean, I suppose at times with certain players in the past, James McCarthy or Obafemi, even, like, there's been fears, that have existed, however valid they were or not, and how much of it was paranoia or not. But
don't remember them. Anytime anyone's taken some time out, it's generally one way.
That's my point. When they take themselves out of a squad, it generally doesn't look great, to be honest. And I mean, there's something vexing about the whole sort of rigmarole that comes with these eligibility discussions, because there's always a sense of, well, what could have been done. I think with this one, the scope is narrow enough for what could be done. I mean, the whole thing has changed now. It's not a case that one cap does it anymore. You throw them in. But Cannon just seems to have taken a lot of people by surprise.
All right, okay.
I think he was around the Ireland setup before. I don't know if he was identified as like a complete flight risk who was going to take the world by storm. And maybe you have to step back. Now, I don't know, is it Lee Carsley or is it just the English, the English recruitment team generally? Like, they probably are more proactive in this zone. And I think there is a feeling that maybe striker might be a slight problem position for them. I mean, it seems daft. I mean, they have some great strikers, but maybe like they don't have an obvious superstar coming through, so they want to spread the net wide, and if there's someone scoring a lot of goals at championship level who seems to be a real number 9 type of front man, well, then you dangle the carrot in their direction, and it seems to have been effective enough. But I don't know. Like, I don't know. In this one, is it a case of, well, this is one that's got away by something that wasn't done? Like, could Ireland have brought him into the squad in March? Maybe they could have done that. But I feel at that stage, him going to play for the 21s, when there was this kid called Evan Ferguson, he sort of wanted to play in March, friendly games. The friendly game against Latvia, that was more important. I don't know if you can completely live your life as a nation and treating every player qualifying through those rules as a flight risk at all times and make all your decisions with that in mind.
Yeah,
I mean, clearly, you have to be mindful of it.
I'm not sure we want to be the type of country that's like quick cap this guy before he's old enough to know his own mind. You know, get him in there, get it done. He's trapped. I don't feel that's the way to approach these things either. I think it's more responsible and just a better way of doing things to let a 19, 20-year-old make up his own mind, because if they really feel Irish, it won't even be a question mark. Evan Ferguson is not a flight risk. No one thinks Evan Ferguson's a flight risk. Gareth Southgate could get down on bended knee and promise him the world. He was never going to go. I think if you're looking at certain players and you're you know, if there's any doubt, personally, I'm not so cutthroat as to say, you know, let's trap them in this marriage. And, you know, because of course if you have them, then they'll end up being very dedicated. They will play for Ireland. They'll probably have good careers. But I don't know. I've no problem if he decides, do you know what, when push comes to shove, I do feel more English than Irish, then no problem with me. I don't buy into we should have locked him in earlier.
Yeah, I mean, any of the we had this before, the Evan Ferguson stuff was ludicrous, but I suppose a more relevant one would be someone like Joe Hodge, who's played Premier League football this year. It's a captain of the 21s, but has been very clear in his mind and done interviews and properly. And like, I know Declan Rice did interviews, but like Joe Hodge has sort of done one-on-one stuff and been very clear in his mind. Like, no, I'm no matter what happens, I'm with Ireland, and people can just take a breath a bit. The point that's been made about Cannon is that COVID is a factor here, that, like, you know, integration is a big thing. That's why it was so hard to take with Declan Rice, because he'd been in the Irish setup for so long, and they probably felt, you know, we've got him here because he was so involved and knew the group. Like, Tom Cannon lost his under-19 year. There was no under-19 football in COVID in 2020, and he'd only come into the fold at the end of 2019. So he hasn't spent a whole lot of time with Ireland. Like, you know, he hasn't spent a load amount of, you know, trips away and time away and built up bonds with people and staff and teammates, and that's just the nature of it. He's not, you know, we were asked Troy Parrott, you know, who's 10 months older than Tom Cannon, like, he's the same age, and it was like, you know, do you have a good relationship with him? He was like, well, I wouldn't say we're best mates. In other words, it was like saying, well, not really, no, like, we're not, you know, he's not one of the lads as such, never has been in an Irish sense. And I think there's a balance, Joe. Like, of course, like, you need to be shrewd enough with these things and try and mind players, and the ones that Ireland have probably kept over the years, they've integrated them and, like, made them happy. And even the likes of McCarthy and McGeady, they liked the Irish setup and they felt at home there. I just don't know if they've really had those chances with Cannon, like, to do it. And
I don't know. You know, I don't like the thought that you have to charm or integrate somebody into nationality. Let them make up their mind. You want to play for us, great. We'll be as welcoming as you can imagine. Yeah. But it's a personal point of view. Anyway, look, let him make up his mind. He's 20 years of age. On the game itself then, so Gus Poyet, who, by the way, when John O'Shea was with us at a roadshow recently, was really singing the praises of Poyet tactically. He's doing some innovative, brilliant stuff, you know. So I can't claim to have seen much of Greece lately, Dan, but they were 3-0 winners in their opening game against Gibraltar. Gus Poyet, interestingly, effusive about John O'Shea as well. He was saying, John was my captain at Sunderland. He was the perfect fit for me. I went to a club that was in chaos. We had 14, 15 new players, 1 point from 7 games. When you need stability, then John O'Shea comes into your mind. He was a great support for me as a captain. You never know who's going to become a coach. I had players with me at Chelsea. I'd look at them and say, no way will he be a coach. Some you say maybe. I knew John O'Shea would become a coach. Assistant with Ireland now. Maybe in the future he'll be their number one. So very charming, doing his thing, Gus Poyet. What can you tell us about Greece beyond 4-3-3? And it is worth mentioning, as we talk about our striking options, they have Douvikas up front, who was the top scorer in the Dutch league this season with 22 goals. If we had the top scorer in any European league, we'd be pretty excited. So Greece and Poyet 2023, Dan? Yeah,
I mean, we're not actually sure about, like, what role Douvikas will play. Like, will he actually be involved? That seems to be one of the question marks, one of the discussion points.
Well, you're scaring me if they're leaving their 22 goals in the Eredivisie player off.
Yeah, well, that seems to be a possibility. I mean, it does seem like, you know, like they have Giakoumakis, who Celtic fans will know, who's like a central striker, who's playing in the MLS at the moment, and like, they do play with this 4-3-3 formation, which seems to be on one side it's a sort of more of a winger, and then the other player cuts inside a little bit more. And there's just some debate over whether he'll be a starter, but we'll see if that's the case. I think with Greece, I mean, we probably talk about Greece often as we think of like 2004 and winning the Euros and sort of, not a great team to watch and sort of, you have a certain perception that sticks that way. I think like what they've actually done under Parrott, they're one of these teams that has used a bad couple of years as momentum towards some better years. I.e., they went down to like League C in the Nations League. Like Ireland, we've always been sort of pottering around League B and not really winning very much at all, and not really using that competition to generate any momentum. Whereas Greece fell further than Ireland by going down to C. But as a result, they've actually used it to win a lot of games. Under Parrott, that means they already have a playoff for the Euro starting the campaign. So they know no matter what happens in this group, they're in a playoff next March, and they're not going to be playing against teams like France and Holland in that playoff no matter what. So it's a weird one. It's a sort of a free hit for them in some respect, this group. But you look at them in recent years, the profile of their results, in some ways not dissimilar to Ireland, that they seem to play well against the better teams, and then you look at the odd result against, I suppose, so-called sort of weaker or similar level sides, and they have a couple of bad ones in there.
Okay.
That these like they've drawn away to Greece, or to Spain, apologies, and like look like a team that can take points off good sides, which Stephen Kenny like flagged as a positive when the draw was put together. The only slight issue is that when Greece play Holland, which are the big games for Ireland, like you would think in the profile of the group, it's sort of later in the year where you're sort of hoping Greece are still interested because they're not automatically in that playoff zone. But for them to be interested later in the year, they sort of need to hurt Ireland over here. So there's like two ways of looking at it. But they have an experienced enough squad. Their captain plays in Turkey, Basiketas, he's a midfielder. Defensively, it seems like they're okay. I think they're just I feel like maybe the options there wouldn't be terrific. But in forward areas, they have a sort of a good mix of players. When I say defensively, I mean in the central areas, because their full-backs would be attacking and a big threat. There's Tsimikas from Liverpool, anyone who's at Liverpool, and I know Andy Robertson is the man, but he obviously comes and plays regularly enough. And then George Baldock from Sheffield United, who's a teammate of John Egan, English-born. They've played the granny rule effectively to get him in. But they have two quite attacking full-backs. And they're strong enough in terms of bodies further forward, but maybe the centre of defence, there's a feeling that maybe they're not like super strong there, and there's a hope that maybe Ireland could pose them some problems in that department. But they are a team that has a lot of possession in games, generally over 60-65% in a lot of games.
Okay. So
it might well be another game where Ireland are a little bit in counter-attacking zone rather than trying to dominate the ball.
Well, to Ireland then. So against France, it was rearguard action, disciplined, well organised, hyper-attentive type performance. The best aspect in many respects going forward in that game was Seamus Coleman and Chidozie Ogbene, both of whom are missing, so that is a blow. Andrew Amadelli is out as well, so we're presuming Dara O'Shea or Dara Lennon will go in alongside John Egan and Nathan Collins. In terms of the shape of the side, is this Evan Ferguson, lone striker, and an array of options behind him, or is this two strikers and the likes of Obafemi or Ida, who they do really like, or Parrott, who knows, probably not involved, up top alongside Ferguson? Do we have any insight into the line of thinking?
No, I think you've probably pitched it there well, in the sense that they are the main discussions. Like I listened to Stephen Kenny talking the other day. I feel like he's probably talking about. He says Evan Ferguson can play both of the roles, but I don't know. With Ogbene being out, like Mikey Johnston is a very interesting player. He was a talented player who was a sort of an out-and-out winger who could play a little bit inverted, but you just feel like the way he's been talking that you feel like it might be a front two with Ferguson, and that it could end up being very similar to France in terms of being that like 3-5-2 or 5-3-2. But I don't know who plays with Ferguson in that combination. You would think Obafemi would be the natural one, all things being equal, but he's played so little football. So then you are looking maybe like Alameda coming into the discussion, but he hasn't played a lot of football. He couldn't even play in that training game last week because he was sick, so that could be a problem. But I feel like that scenario is more likely than the alternative, which would be, I suppose, a 3-4-3 or 3-4-2-1, where it's like Mikey Johnston playing behind, or even Smallbone and Jason Knight playing behind in like a box setup with Cullen and Malumbi. I feel like if you're going to be in a counter-attacking situation, you need something a little bit different for this game. I don't know if Evan Ferguson is your man up front on the counter-attack that manages that. I feel like Evan Ferguson, and Kenny speaks about it all the time, like at Brighton he plays in a very unique system, like a front two, a 4-2-4, where like the wingers are higher than the strikers. Like Evan Ferguson spends a lot of his time almost in midfield. I don't know if Evan Ferguson suddenly flips to being that number 9 running the channels, being that Irish striker away from home.
Which they'll need if Greece are going to have that level of possession, because Ogbene against France, if there is a parallel between the two games, Ogbene was such a great outball for Ireland, and Jason Knight, as diligent as he was in his off the ball work, on the left hand side it was Doherty that night at wing back and Knight. They didn't pose the same kind of athletic threat down the left hand side for Ireland. So with Ogbene out, if Knight's likely to play again, you don't want to reduce it to split strikers and we'll play deep and try and play that way, but that does seem like a very tempting option, especially when you've got strikers with pace. I mean, let's not feel too down about that. That's a great option.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Ireland have been quite effective at times in their away games when they've utilised that. You know, you probably think of certain away games like Ida against Portugal, for example, and matches like that might spring to mind. So I think there's a logic for going that way. I suppose the alternative, Kenny's made this point that sometimes in a 3-4-3 Ireland have more control in the game, but maybe they don't sort of penetrate as well. And so let's say you went with something a bit different. Let's say Smallbone as an extra body, you could play Smallbone on the right. Notionally had that great link up with Matt Doherty against Latvia. Yeah. And you might suddenly find you have more of the ball in the game, but when it comes to, I suppose, really sort of breaking in behind, like where is it going to come from? Particularly when Ferguson's natural tendency just seems to come short. But that seems to be what he naturally wants to do. And then he spins and tries to get into space if you're getting up the pitch. But it's difficult. Look, I feel like this game is going to be very much, and I imagine a lot of decisions are just going to be informed by energy and athleticism and the ability to get around the park. And that I know I've downplayed the conditions aspect of it, and it's clearly not the concern it was. I mean, I suppose if it's sweltering, you think it's going to be ridiculous. I mean, part of it is not to be doing silly running. Like, you want to, control the tempo yourself to some degree, but you sort of feel like there's going to be an element of energy that I think, Callum O'Donnell will certainly play on the left wing back, and you've got Doherty on the other side who hasn't played too much, but you're probably looking at players who can really get around the park, rather than maybe this sort of laboured, slow build-up, which maybe even thinking back to Armenia last year, Ireland were probably a little bit guilty of that, and they weren't physically great at that time, and there were a couple of players they were carrying, and the whole balance of the team just ended up being all wrong. I sort of feel like you might just see in the marginal decisions, like energy will be a big factor rather than, say, sort of technical ability, you could argue. Yeah.
And I presume in Coleman's absence, Doherty goes from left hand side to right hand side, and O'Dowda generally being looked at as best man to fill left wing back.
I would have thought so, yeah. I think it's between Dowda and McLean, but I think it's been clear enough. I think O'Dowda would have probably played against France, which would be a tough one. You kind of wonder, it's one of these things, if O'Dowda had been fit to play against France, would he have dropped Doherty or would he have not played Coleman? I mean, I don't know. But definitely, I would have picked up the vibe, certainly, like O'Dowda is the number one in that position now. And he's had a pretty decent season at Cardiff. I think him with McLean coming off the bench is the most likely scenario.
The same question I asked you before the French game, and you did correctly answer that night. Which Greek player is going to score from 30 yards?
Oh God, I'm not even tempting fate by picking one this time, Joe. I'm just not going there. Oh God, I don't know. Like, I mean, at least if they're going to inflict, just do something differently. You know, like a through ball into the area and a clip over the keeper. If you're going to lose to something like that. But you just have this image, all right, of Ireland players like a slow motion disaster movie, like 4 or 5 of them realizing what's going to happen as they eventually start to close down this shooter from distance, you know, dramatically throwing their bodies in the way.
So what is your prediction then as we approach the most inevitable 1-1 draw I've ever seen?
Well, thank you now. Thanks for spoiling my prediction, Joe.
Is it 1-1 as well?
I feel like we're going to get back to the tradition of a 1-1 draw here, aren't we?
And how are we to feel about a 1-1 draw?
I don't know. Yeah, like I think if the order of the fixtures were different, you might feel okay about a 1-1 draw. And like in isolation, being fair, looking at levels of teams and so on, I don't think you can be particularly annoyed with it. But
I don't think we've any right to expect to go to Athens and beat Greece.
But it feels like Ireland again, like this is the whole nature of the group. If Ireland's second seeds were Bosnia or Iceland or some of the other Wales or so many other options it could have been, then your mindset to this game would be completely different. There's absolutely no doubt the mindset.
As in, we've no room for error, so of course we just have to beat Greece.
Well, no, well, exactly. That's where the feeling is now.
Yeah.
Whereas in normal circumstances, you'd probably feel happy enough with a draw because you'd feel like, well, Greece are in this group with us too, and it's all a part of the contest. Where it almost feels like Ireland have to beat Greece twice.
Yeah.
And somehow hope that in the league table with Ireland and Holland against Greece, like they get a little bit of a gain there, and you know, get a bit of a gain in the head-to-head with Ireland and Holland, and that's probably what you're hoping for.
And as Gus Poyet's comments suggested, and I read them out at the start of the piece, they feel exactly the same about this fixture, if not even more so, because they're at home. Yeah,
and look, you reach for the positives. You would hope, you know, as the home side, do they leave the type of gaps that Ireland want to exploit because they're feeling that way? But I don't know. I mean, Poyet's obviously going to say that, but I still have to feel that they're not under the same pressure in a way because they have this playoff against weaker teams coming next year. So
do they? Sorry, I'm not always au fait with the vagaries. So they have a safety net that we don't.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So they are in a Nations League playoff next March, no matter what. And they already know the 3 likely opponents they will face, and they're not at the level of Ireland even.
So their chances, they have a very good chance of getting to the Euros.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, so they can have a real pop at this. So I mean, that's obviously a problem. Like in another way, I think you just would prefer this game to be later on, but it is what it is. Like that's Ireland. I think like definitely you don't want to be in this sort of excuse mindset, you know. And I do feel like what I would say is maybe Ireland could win this game. Like I generally feel with Stephen Kenny's Ireland, right, and there's a pattern that's there that when there's a long build up to a game, I know they were bad in Armenia, right, and they were, but that was a 4-game June where they maybe took their eye off the ball a little bit because they were playing Ukraine and Scotland and Ukraine afterwards. I generally find when there's a long build up to these away games or to any game, you know, the first game in a window is generally quite good, and what kills them is the second game. You know, a couple of days later, there's a massive hangover. So I feel like, you know, they really should be on point and they will produce a good performance here. Play Gibraltar on Monday, and I mean, they might be uninspiring and just get the job done in that game. But I don't think it's outlandish to suggest that they can win. You know, and I feel like when they've had a long prep for a game of this nature, the performance has generally been good. But again, and eventually you just have to change the story of Stephen Kenny's time, where a lot of nice performances in these games, but they haven't got over the line. You know, they haven't just dug it out, and like that story has to change. Whatever your view on the broader, bigger picture stuff, or whatever it is, you know, how fair are the expectations, and you can come at it from different ways. Like, they are a young team, they are, but eventually they just have to sort of step up and like nick one of these games. Yeah. You know, show that killer instinct to nick one of them, even if they don't deserve it sometimes. And it sort of feels like, you know, to even get the big results, they have to really deserve it. You know, they really have to. Like, everything needs to come together. Like, they blitzed Scotland that time, which was great. played really well against Ukraine afterwards in Poland, really well, but drew 1-1. Let them back into the game. Taking the lead and let the lead slip. They've done that a couple of times in these big games, and in fact, they scored the first goal in a lot of these matches. Serbia away, Portugal away, Scotland away, Ukraine away. Ireland have sort of taken the lead, which is great, but they haven't seen it through. And that's why they need to sort of write a new story in these matches and eventually just take themselves collectively to another level. Because ultimately, right, this group is about two things. One, it's about trying to qualify in top two. But the other in the back pocket is to think that if Ireland end up in a playoff next March, which is quite likely, not statistically certain, but likely, you have to believe that this group has the mentality to go and win those games against similar sides, and they haven't really shown it yet. So that's the bigger symbolism of these matches as well.
Okay, well, we will reconvene next week, I suspect. At some stage, I'll probably see Aviva Gibraltar. We'll have a chat maybe pre-match there, and who knows what conversation we'll be having about Friday night. Dan, thank you so much. Enjoy Athens, enjoy the game Friday. Cheers.
I'll complete the travel review for you then, Joe. I bet you can't wait.
I can't. Listen, if the sequel lives up to your first effort.
Yeah, be good. Be good.
Enjoy. Thanks a million. Dan McDonnell, who of course you can read as well in the Irish Independent. Ireland away to Greece. That is Friday night, and then Gibraltar on the Monday at the Aviva.